Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2 was recently released on November 7th, 2023. A follow-up to the first game, All-Star Brawl 2 was a bit of a surprise when it was announced, considering it was just 2 years after the original game. In today's gaming world of live service, we expect multiplayer games to be supported for years, as opposed to getting follow-up sequels so quickly. In the case of All-Star Brawl, a sequel was necessary simply because there were not enough people playing the original. The first game suffered at launch from a lack of polish and a poor single-player experience. To put it simply, the game just felt kinda cheap, especially due to the game having no voice acting at launch. Even though voice acting was added later, not having it right away really hurt the perception of All-Star Brawl. It made it seem like a budget title, unable to compete with the other platform fighters on the market. The sequel aimed to address all of these complaints and change this perception. The game would have a larger cast with full voice acting alongside a fully fleshed out single-player roguelike mode. The sequel also added cross-platform play, which is a very important feature for modern multiplayer games. There was a lot to look forward to with Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2. The marketing was good, and the hype for the game actually did seem pretty high. With multiverses offline, there was a hole in the non-Nintendo platform fighter space. It really did seem like All-Star Brawl 2 was going to have a decent shot at success. But then the game came out and no one cared. The game's all-time peak on Steam is just 2,319 players. That is embarrassingly low. Despite positive feedback from the people who were playing the game, the numbers just kept dropping. The game currently struggles to hold even 500 concurrent players. The game even often drops into the 100-150 player range at the late night hours. That is bad. That is really bad. These are the numbers you would expect to see from a 5-year-old multiplayer game that is no longer even supported. But this game is brand new. I do want to be fair and acknowledge that the game is also available on PS5, Xbox, Switch, so while Steam does not represent the entire player base, I can't imagine these numbers are looking much better on any of those platforms. I think what's most concerning here is that All-Star Brawl 2 is not even a bad game. By all accounts, it's actually quite good. So what is the issue? I think the issue really comes down to the price. The game launched for $50 and people just had no interest in paying that price. It was especially off-putting because many of the other recent platform fighters such as Multiverses or Brawlhalla were free. Personally, I did not buy the game day one because I was worried that this very thing would happen. I was worried that the player count would be too low and therefore not be a viable long-term experience. I think a lot of people had this same thought, and that puts All-Star Brawl 2 in a very difficult place. The player count is low because no one is buying the game, but no one is buying the game because the player count is low. So now you're stuck in this loop that many multiplayer games do find themselves in. This is why the free-to-play model has become so popular in recent years. Developers would rather have large player numbers flooding into the game from the free download rather than charging them up front. This allows your game to garner that large audience necessary to keep a multiplayer game viable for years to come. At that point, the developers will make their money from in-game purchases. It's definitely a controversial strategy, but it's one that clearly works. I recently made a video about multiverses and analyzed what I thought went wrong and caused that game to fail. I do really quickly want to say thank you for all the support on that video. When reading the comments, I noticed many of them were talking about the free-to-play model of multiverses being the main issue with that game. And from a purely business standpoint, I really could not disagree more. I get it. No one wants our games littered with microtransactions. On paper, we would all rather pay full price for a genuinely complete experience instead of a free-to-play game that nickel and dimes you any chance they get. But in practice, this doesn't seem to be the case. We can complain about free-to-play games all we want, but the practice clearly works. Look at all the most popular live service games over the past few years. Fortnite, Valorant, Apex, Warzone, etc. All of these games use the free-to-play model. To bring up Multiverses again, the reason that game had such incredible player numbers at launch was because it was free to play. Players were willing to jump in and give it a try because what did they have to lose? Once they gave it a try, word of mouth spread, and that's how Multiverses found itself with those massive player numbers. Those comments on my Multiverses video tell me that most gamers do not approve of the free-to-play model. All-Star Brawl 2 tells the opposite story. I don't want to seem like this video is me defending free-to-play. It absolutely is a predatory business practice. It makes worse games and it really hurts small developers as well. I understand and agree with all of that. But at the same time, the results sadly don't lie. All-Star Brawl 2's price tag made players turn away. They were not willing to risk $50 on a game that could be dead in a month. If All-Star Brawl 2 had been free to play, thousands of players would have hopped in to give it a try. And due to the quality of the game, I have to imagine that a lot of those players would have stuck around. But instead, these developers are left scrambling, trying to find a way to salvage this game. The game has already had a discount with a Black Friday sale on Humble. A discount to any game less than a month after launch is never a good sign. I was curious to see if this sale would help the player numbers, but sadly it did not. At this point, I truly think the only way to save All-Star Brawl 2 is to go free to play. It would not be the first time we've seen a game do this. Recent examples of premium games going free to play include Rocket League and Fall Guys. It's a great way to breathe new life into your game. Of course, it is controversial as the players who did pay money for the game are going to be pretty upset. Oftentimes, games in this situation will give in-game currency or cosmetics or something like that to the players who did pay to try and make this even. In the case of All-Star Brawl 2, they would need to give a pretty massive offering to the players who did pay, and I understand that this would be highly controversial, but I genuinely think this is the only real option to save the game. So my conclusion here, and really the whole point of this video, is free-to-play is highly controversial for good reason. Yet, games that go down this path are almost always more successful than those that don't. I think it is the most fascinating trend in gaming right now. Everywhere you look, people are complaining about free-to-play. Yet everywhere you look, people are engaging with those same free-to-play games that they're complaining about. I'm really interested to see where this phenomenon goes from here. But for now, Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2's failure is a sign that the free-to-play model is not going to go away anytime soon.